She was auctioned off while still bleeding from birth, but one rancher bought her just to give her. The words would sound like fiction to anyone who hadn't seen the cruel reality of that frontier town, where desperation often fed men's greed and women's dignity was treated as less than cattle. Her name was Clara, a frail young woman barely 20, who had just endured the agony of childbirth only to lose her baby within hours. Her body was weak, trembling, still aching and bleeding, when her own kin, hardened by poverty and shame, dragged her to the town square where the wooden platform stood. The auctioneer's voice rang sharp and merciless, calling for bids as though she were no more than a horse or mule. "A young woman strong enough to serve, ready for housework. Who will start me off?" he shouted. The crowd's laughter and murmurs filled the air, but Clara's eyes were distant, her spirit nearly broken. Her dress clung to her, stained, her hands bound before her, her head bowed. Yet behind the haze of pain, a single thought burned. How could the world strip me of everything, even my chance to grieve my child in peace? And then through the throng, a tall figure appeared. A man in a wide-brimmed hat, his jaw set firm, his gaze cutting through the mockery around him. He was Eli Thompson, a rancher known for keeping to himself, a widower with no children, hardened by the land, but not by cruelty. When his eyes fell on Clara, he saw not what the crowd saw. He didn't see a weak, discarded woman. He saw injustice, raw and vile. The bidding started low, men tossing coins like they were paying for amusement. Eli's voice cut through it, steady and final. "I'll take her." The crowd went silent for a moment, then erupted in whispers. "The rancher's gone mad," they muttered. But Eli stepped forward, placed his payment on the table, and climbed onto the platform. He untied Clara's hands himself, ignoring the auctioneer's impatient smirk, and draped his own coat around her shoulders. Clara looked up at him, startled, tears welling but unshed. She expected harshness, commands, more chains, but instead he only said, low enough for her ears alone, "You're safe now." With that, he led her gently through the jeering crowd, shielding her fragile body with his frame, and toward a life she couldn't yet imagine. The ride to Eli's ranch was quiet, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the distant cry of coyotes. Clara sat wrapped in his coat, her eyes lowered, her hands trembling in her lap. Every bump of the trail reminded her of her body's wounds, but she said nothing. She had learned silence as survival. Eli glanced at her now and then, his hand steady on the reins. He had not bought her as a possession, though that was what the world would assume. He had bought her to save her, though even he couldn't yet explain why. Perhaps it was because he too knew the sting of loss. His wife had died giving birth years before, and the emptiness of that night had carved scars deeper than any wound. When they arrived, the ranch house stood against the horizon, simple but sturdy, with lantern light glowing from within. Eli helped Clara down, steadying her as her legs faltered. Inside, the warmth of the fire welcomed them. He led her to a chair, brought water, and without a word, began tending to her wounds. Clara stiffened at first, expecting roughness, but his hands were careful, respectful, treating her as though she were made of glass. "You don't owe me anything," he finally said, his voice gruff yet gentle. She stared at him, confused. No man had ever said such a thing. That night, Eli gave her his late wife's room to rest in, the quilt still soft and smelling faintly of lavender. Clara lay awake, tears streaming silently, trying to understand why this stranger would show kindness when even her own family had sold her. Days turned into weeks. She grew stronger, her body healing slowly, though the ache of loss lingered in her soul. She began to notice small things. The way Eli spoke gently to his horses, how he worked from dawn till dusk without complaint, how he left fresh bread by her door in the mornings, though he claimed he couldn't cook. He never pressed her, never demanded anything. He gave her space, respect, and little by little a chance to remember she was human. For the first time in her life, Clara felt what it was to breathe without fear. Yet doubt gnawed at her. What future could she possibly have? She was barren now, useless in the eyes of the world. But each time she thought of leaving, she found herself rooted to that cabin, where a lonely rancher's quiet strength had begun to steady her own heart. Spring came to the ranch in a flourish of green and gold. The fields alive with blossoms and the sky wide with promise. By then, Clara was no longer the broken figure who had stumbled from the auction block. She rose with the sun, her hands busy with chores, her voice softly humming tunes she hadn't remembered in years. She laughed with the ranch hands, stitched clothes, and filled the once empty house with warmth. Eli noticed it all quietly, never saying much, but his eyes softened whenever they met hers. Yet the town had not forgotten. Whispers followed whenever they went for supplies. That's the girl they sold. That rancher's keeping her like a prize. Clara's chest tightened with every word, shame threatening to drown her. But one evening, as they walked through the market, a man sneered loud enough for all to hear. "She's nothing but damaged goods, and you bought her like cattle." The words sliced through her. But before she could bow her head, Eli turned, his voice like thunder. "She's not cattle. She's not damaged. She's stronger than any of you cowards who'd laugh at a woman's pain. She deserves more respect than this whole town combined." Silence fell, heavy and stunned. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but this time not from shame. For the first time, someone had defended her worth, not as a servant, not as property, but as a woman deserving of dignity. That night, under the stars, she found the courage to speak her truth. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why would you care when no one else did?" Eli's gaze was steady, his voice low. "Because I know what it is to lose everything. And I know what it is to be alone. I couldn't save my wife, but I could save you. And maybe, Clara, you can save me too." Her heart trembled with the weight of his words. In that moment, she realized he hadn't just given her shelter. He had given her back her life, her worth, and the chance to begin again. Love did not need to be spoken. It had been written in every act of kindness, every silence shared between them. As the stars glimmered above, Clara leaned against him, not as a woman broken, but as one finally whole. And friends, if Clara's story touched your heart, if you believe in dignity, second chances, and love that heals the deepest wounds, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More stories of courage, redemption, and hope are waiting just for you.